All right, let's do a review of the Excel program that I've developed for operations on the 12-foot by 20-inch shelf layout. So the first thing I've done, this is all done in Excel, and it's formatted in such a way they can be printed out on 8.5 by 11 pages and put on a clipboard. But let me show you what I do before each operating session. I have this one tab where you enter in all the cars and the engines. So you enter in what track number they're on, the engines, and you enter which cars are in each of the two interchange yard tracks in the order that they sit there. And then you go down and you enter what cars sit in each of the different door spots at each of the industries. So the food plant, the printing plant, distribution and cold storage, and ADM facility, and then any cars that are out of service. In this case, I've got one. And up here is a map that's labeled. This comes off of AnyRail app where I designed the track plan. And I label where the doors are and where the industries are, and the track numbers for the engine facility 1 and 2, and for the 2-track interchange yard, track 1 and 2. So anyone who's operating the layout who isn't familiar with it can refer to this when they're starting to operate. So this page is the only place you enter in data. So it's all done with formulas. So once you enter in where the cars sit on the interchange tracks 1 and 2, and where the engines sit in the engine facility, and then you enter in where the cars are sitting at each of the industries, it all flows through 4 different operating sessions. And the way I have the operating session set up is there's 10 cars. So there's 5 cars on each of the 2 interchange tracks. And the goal, and you can mix the order, but in a typical op session, the first thing you do is you take engine from track 1, which is 2007, and you would take out the cut of 5 cars from interchange track 1, you'd pull it out, and then you'd back it into the industry area. You've got multiple runarounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, if you really count them all, and you switch all the industries based on what shows up on the switch lists that are generated from this program. And then once those cars are switched out from track 1, you're going to come back with the cars that you've exchanged. You're going to pull up and you're going to back those cars back into interchange track number 1. You're going to put that engine back, and then you're going to take the second engine out of track 2 in the engine facility, and you'll pull out the second cut of 5 cars from the track 2 of the interchange yard, and then you'll go out and you'll do that sequence of switching, which will be all of the cars in the industries that you didn't switch the first run. So then for sessions 3 and 4, you're basically going to be taking the cars out of track 1 and track 2 and switching those again, because those are different cars now because you switched them out. So at the end of the 4 sessions, you've really kind of put back all the cars that you started with in the very first of the 4 sessions, if that makes sense. So the whole sequence for one guy could take you a couple of days. And it's a small layout, but it gives you a tremendous amount of switching opportunity, which is why I designed it this way. And you can do, like the Ops Buddy, where you just randomly roll a dice and change things up. You don't have to follow it so logically, but I like to have some structure and some order that works in case I want to do it that way, especially if you have people over and you're switching. It makes the whole sequence smoother. So to back up, this first worksheet here, car placement entry, is where you enter all the cars that are sitting in the interchange yard and in the industries when you set up for an operating session. Then you'll start the first operating session. So I'm going to click here on cut 1 of the first inbound train. So this is the switch list that's generated based on what we just entered in. So it has that same map, op session switch cut 1 of the first inbound train. So there's cut 1 and cut 2 of the first inbound train sitting there in the interchange yard when you start the session. And based on what you put in that car placement worksheet, it's going to tell you what's sitting where. So Providence and Worcester engine 2007 is on track 1. and your cut one of the first inbound train sitting on track one consists of these cars. So that's what's on that track one. And your switch list, your operations work order is what follows below. And again, this is all done, as you can see here, with formulas. So you don't enter anything in here. It's done for you once you plug the numbers in there, or the car numbers in there. So at Bombachi Foods, it's going to tell you in this run you're going to pick up 2 cars, you're going to leave 1 car alone, and you're going to place 2 cars. And these 2 cars you're going to place obviously are in the consist that you've pulled out of the yard. And it tells you what, just to check, it tells you what the set out of cars looks like when you arrive at Bombachi Foods, and then what it should look like when you pull away. And you'll do the same for the printing plant, for the distribution and storage facility, and for the ADM transfer facility. And then you'll take what you've exchanged and you'll back that set of cars back into track one on the interchange yard. So now you're putting a different set of cars in, and you'll reset your power on track one, and you'll leave the engine on track two alone. The X means do nothing. There's a set of rules. So for anyone not familiar with the layout, just to keep it prototypical, there's gates and deraillers on every siding and also at the engine facility. So always open the gates and deraillers before spotting cars. Always, there's a typo in there. Always close gates and deraillers after spotting. Always place the blue flag on the engine tracks after moving or spotting locomotives. Always sound the horn and bell when approaching grade crossings. Always sound the bell when entering or leaving interchange yard or sidings. Always place flashing rear end device on the coupler of the last car when leaving or returning to the interchange yard, and always sound the locomotive horn once before moving forward, 3 times before reversing. So to be honest, I don't always follow my own rules, but it's good to have them in there if you want to really get prototypical. So that would be the first operating session. So you start out with these cars, you do the switching per the list, and this is what you should be bringing back to the yard. And if you don't make any mistakes, the next part of the operating session is cut 2 of the inbound train, and you should now be starting with these cars sitting on track 2, 5 cars. So in this case, you're going to pull out engine 2203 from track 2, and you're going to pull that cut of cars out, back it into the industries, and you're going to switch per the work order here. And you don't have to switch them in the order that sits here. Once the cars are out there in the industry area, you can switch, for example, the printing facility, then the ADM facility, then Bombachi Foods. But you're really that's up to the conductor and engineer to decide, okay, what will be the most efficient based on what order the cars are in as they leave the yard. And you could do some shuffling of the cars in the interchange yard before you pull out, just to add another element to the operations. But I typically just pull out the cars in whatever order they're in. It makes it more of a challenge. But there's always a way to make it work. I've tried multiple iterations. Some ways are more efficient than others, obviously, and you'll learn that as you go. So this is what session 2 would look like. And you would then back that train. Once you exchange the cars, you'd back that into track 2 of the interchange yard, and it should contain these cars. And the order of the cars may be different than what I'm showing here because it depends on what order you do the switching in. But as long as you have those cars, you haven't made a mistake. So now you've got both sets of 5 cars in the interchange yard, but they're different cars than what you started out in the first 2 sessions because you've now switched out all the cars at the industry. There's 10 cars in total at the industries. There's 3 at the food plant, there's 2 at the printing plant, 2 at the distribution, and 3 at the ADM facility. So by the time you're done with switching both cuts of the interchange train, you've switched out all of the cars in the industries. What happens next is you can assume it's the next day, the next week. You're then going to go through the sequence again, where you're starting with cut 1 of the second inbound train. So now you assume it's a different inbound train because it's a different set of cars in the yard. And you'll go through that same sequence where on the first cut, you're picking up 2 from the food plant, picking up 1 from printing, 1 from distribution, 1 from ADM. And then on the second cut of track 2, you're changing 1 at the food plant, 1 at printing, 1 at distribution, and 2 at the ADM facility. Since there's 3 spots at the ADM facility, one day you're taking 1 day you're taking 2. So at this point, you've basically gotten back to where you were at the very beginning of cut 1 of the first train, if that makes sense. So just to double check my logic here and that the program works right. So let's take these cars. This is what you ended after 4 sessions with in track 2. So let's copy that and let's go back to what did track 2 look like in the first round. Am I doing that right? So if I paste that here, yeah, so you can see cargo. So we ended the 4th session with these cars that I have in this pasted area here. This is what we started out with in track 2 at the very first session. So now we've come full circle after 4 sessions. So you should have the same car, not in the same orders, but the same cars in track 2. So we've got cargo 4780. We've got Railbox 11010. We've got Railbox 10959. We've got ADM 15817, and we've got ADM 6199. Yeah, so it worked. So the logic works in the program. So the cool thing about this is you essentially just have that one input page where you're putting everything in, and then you go through all 4 sessions, and each one again has a little check. So you make sure that the right cars are there when you get there, and you're leaving with the right cars. Or sorry, the right cars are there when you leave once you've done your switching for each of the industries. And then it tells you what you're bringing back to the yard. And it just keeps going all the way through the 4 sessions. So that is it. Pretty straightforward. Quite a bit of playing around to get it to work right. But you can do pretty much anything in Excel if you spend enough time on it. And then this is I'll show you what it looks like here when it's printed out. So these are, again, as I mentioned, these are formatted so that they print out 1 worksheet per page on an 8.5 by 11. So I can put that on a clipboard, so whoever's working the trains can look at the clipboard, and you can see here that there's a page for switch cut 1 of the first inbound train, a page for cut 2 of the first inbound train, and then you have a page for cut 1 of the second inbound train, and a page for cut 2 of the second inbound train. And there you have it. So small layout, but a lot you can do. And you can do all kinds of variations within what I just talked about. But there is a structure and an order to actually do this thoroughly. And then you can throw some randomization in there to make it even more interesting. So I hope that makes sense. It's difficult to see that when you're looking at a spreadsheet. But what I'll do moving forward is I'll actually do some operations and show you how that all works, and actually show you the trains running, which I haven't really done much of so far on the channel. So I hope that's helpful, and thank you for watching, and hopefully you will like and subscribe.